I have a friend who's an Orthodox rabbi. And just last week we were studying together, and during that study session we were reading an essay by a Hasidic rabbi named the Rebbe Rashab. It's about prayer. And he said something, what did it do? It sort of woke me up, is what I'd say. It's easier when you study or do things like that to just do it in an automatic way, and this one just sort of woke me up. He said that for those of us who pray 3 times a day, sometimes we're just praying. The assumption is that it's some big, meaningful experience every time. And no, sometimes you're just praying. You're just doing it. He also said for those of us who pray 3 times a day, it's important to find a way to make it meaningful. One way that I think about it is that for Reform Jews, the potential problem is that we don't do much at all. For Orthodox Jews, the potential problem is they do so much it can become mechanical and by rote. The essay we were reading by the Rebbe Rashab laid out a 5-step process for making prayer a spiritual experience. He says that if we internalize this step-by-step process, our prayer is more likely to be meaningful. It's more likely that we feel the presence of God in our lives. Tonight I'm going to talk about these 5 steps, and I hope that thinking about them, or really better yet, feeling about them, will help us answer some of these questions. Becoming present. One reason prayer feels so difficult is that we often arrived at the temple carrying everything from the week. Our bodies may be in the sanctuary, but our minds are still, in the realm of emails, conversations that made us nervous, worrying about tomorrow, etc. And the Rabbi Rashab begins his Kuntras HaTefillah, his essay on prayer, or his tract on prayer, with a simple insight. Before we can pray, we must become present. We must actually be here. Prayer is not only the recitation of words, it's a place where we gather up ourselves. And this is where yira begins. We often translate this word, or it's often translated as fear, which it does mean. It means fear. The semantic range of Hebrew words tends to be a little wider than English in the meaning range, because there are fewer words. Not so much anymore, but in rabbinic texts and biblical Hebrew. Yira, translated as fear, sort of misses it. The Hebrew instead can also mean awe. So it's essentially talking about the experience that we have when it's like, whoa. Or if you're a God believer, wow, that's God. Or, wow, this is an incredible experience with something greater than myself. Now that, if you're doing it right, is scary. It's challenging. But at the same time, there's that feeling of awe, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. Wonder interrupts distraction. It reminds us that we're standing before something greater than ourselves. The goal is not to force ourselves to believe more or feel more. The goal is to become attentive. Prayer begins not when we speak to God, but when we allow ourselves to become aware that life itself is filled with God's mystery. Step number 2, seeing beyond ourselves. So once we're here, in the here and now, the Rashab teaches that prayer must also loosen our grip on just ourselves. Most of the day we experience the world from the center of our own concerns, my schedule, my frustrations, my ambitions. Prayer is supposed to shift that perspective away from ourselves. Again, yira, wonder becomes a doorway. Wonder reminds us that we're not the center of existence. We're part of something immeasurably larger, the stars above us, the generations before us, the people sitting beside us tonight, all invite humility. How can they not when you see that vastness? Humility is not thinking less of ourselves. We recognize that we're participants in a reality far greater than our individual lives. And this is why prayer can feel uncomfortable. It asks us to surrender, if only for a few moments, the illusion that everything depends on us. And in that surrender, we don't become smaller, we discover that we belong to something larger. Third step, awakening the heart. The Rashab insists, this is important, that prayer cannot remain an intellectual exercise. If we're just thinking about it, it's not doing its job. At some point, intellect must include emotions. The truths we know with our minds is a seed that grows within our hearts. And this is often where people become discouraged. We can't command ourselves to feel inspired. We can't manufacture emotion. Wonder is a way out of this dilemma. Wonder does not require us to force an emotional experience. It asks us to remain open to one. Think about standing beside the ocean or looking into the night sky. We don't create those moments, we receive them. Prayer works in much the same way. We prepare ourselves through repetition and reflection. The heart then begins to respond in its own time. Sometimes that response is joy, sometimes gratitude, sometimes longing, sometimes silence. Thank you for keeping silent prayer silent. I really like that. The Reform movement sometimes prepare for silent prayer, and then there's music. So, all of these experiences acknowledge that we've encountered something greater than ourselves. The fourth step, transformation. For the Rashab, genuine prayer changes the person who prays. If we leave the temple exactly as we entered, we miss something. Prayer is not only communication with God, it's also a gradual reshaping of the soul. We return to Yira, to wonder. Wonder softens our certainty. It reminds us that our perspective is partial. We begin to see ourselves and others with greater generosity. The arguments that seem so important become less consuming. The resentments we carried begin to loosen their grip. We recognize that every person we meet also stands before the same mystery that stands before us. This is why the purpose of prayer is not confined to the sanctuary. Its purpose is to prepare us for the world beyond these walls. Prayer succeeds not when we've had an extraordinary spiritual experience, but when we become more compassionate, more patient, and more attentive after we leave the temple. And it's only discipline that can do that. Repetition and discipline is what brings that compassion. Your mind explodes and it's just exploded. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a nice guy afterwards. The fifth step, carrying prayer into life. The Rashab's final movement is the most important. Prayer is not meant to remain within services. It's meant to accompany us into ordinary life. This is one of the big messages of Hasidism. Ordinary life is where the meaning is. Tomorrow morning, we're going to learn about this idea that the Hasidim have, that God is hidden, and how we reveal it is through small actions. Just saying hello to somebody. That's how God gets revealed. So wonder changes the way that we see. After all, the first word of this week's Torah portion is the word see. See, I said before you today, a blessing and a curse. With the seeing, the sunrise becomes more than weather. A conversation becomes more than small talk. Another person's joy and suffering become worthy of our attention. We begin to recognize that every moment carries the possibility of a transformed self and a transformed world. This could be why prayer feels so difficult. We have expected it to produce a dramatic emotion, and the Rashab offers a different vision. Prayer begins with a willingness to stand in wonder before a reality we cannot fully comprehend. From that wonder grows humility. From humility grows love. From love grows a life that reflects the presence of God, not only during the prayers we recite, but in the way that we live every day. And this is one of the greatest gifts of Shabbat. Shabbat allows us to practice what the Rashab describes. It opens that space. We open our hearts, we stand in wonder, and we allow prayer, and we allow everyday life to reshape us. So if our prayers end with Kaddish, we've missed the purpose. If they teach us to be kind, to notice beauty, and to feel a greater awareness of God, then Shabbat has accomplished its work. Prayer is not meant to remain inside these walls. It's meant to accompany us into every conversation, every decision, and every act of compassion. You got to give yourself a break on that one, too. You can't do it every time. So may this Shabbat help us become people whose lives themselves are a prayer, reflecting God's presence wherever we go. Shabbat Shalom.